This channel, and indeed the website that it spawned from, blossomed from a Pro Evolution Soccer fan site. PES was my go-to game for the longest time, and WAMB was my Bible. The podcast was undoubtedly the first one I became a real fan of, with Surf and Adam's musings becoming staples of my week, even deep into the annual cycle when nothing was really happening with the game. I was queuing up in whatever game store I could get into at midnight on launch day, getting excited to have the new PES in my hands, excitedly declaring that the king is back despite glaring issues. I'm looking at you, PES 2008. Over the years, my interest in PES as well as my love for football subsided somewhat, but I'd still pick it up out of habit more than anything else. Master Leagues, tournament nights with a few friends and a fridge full of beer, it was a staple of my gaming diet. Over the last few years, football's come back into my life, like an ex-girlfriend who suddenly looked like a supermodel with an interest in all the things she left me for liking, but the love for PES never fully rekindled. Of course, I still picked it up on launch day, even if a code had been provided, but it never really grabbed me by the short and curlies like it used to. It was with intrigue then that I started to hear mutterings earlier this year around PES's future. I heard from multiple sources that the game was looking at going free to play, and I also had a smattering of information that there was going to be a heavy focus on my club and the mobile version. After the development break that led to the 2021 season update release and the Unreal announcement, it started to click into place. But I still didn't quite buy the mobile focused rumour that I'd heard. Well, the announcement's been and gone, and it looks like some of the things that I heard were accurate. Some of it for better, and some, well, let's talk about it. It's impossible to know where to start, but I think I'm going to begin with what I think the net positives are with the shift from going free to play. I think it's fair to say that releasing an annual sports title at full price is beginning to feel a little bit more outdated as time goes on. PES, FIFA, NBA, Madden, they're all guilty of the same thing. Seemingly incremental upgrades over the previous year's title, with microtransaction-fueled squad-building games increasingly taking prominence over what many would consider the core modes that shaped the franchise's history. If we look at Foot, for example, it makes EA over £1 billion a year on its own. When a single mode in a full-price title rakes in that much money from microtransactions alone, the argument is there to suggest that it shouldn't be a full-price title. With eFootball, looking to disrupt this traditional distribution methods for sports titles, it could only be a matter of time before we start to see FIFA and the rest following suit. And there have already been rumours that EA will be following Konami's lead with FIFA 23. This is undoubtedly a net positive for the free-to-play model. I'd heard that my club makes more money than the initial sales figures when it comes to PES, and if this is accurate, then it makes total sense. Fans get a free release of PES each year, and Konami get an ideally larger audience for the money to come in from that mode. Hell, I'm even on board with charging for individual single-player modes. If I could get a Master League each year for 10 or 20 quid, I'd be right up for that. So, in short, free-to-play is good. Next up is the Crossplay debacle. Now, this might be a controversial opinion, but in theory, crossplay is an absolute necessity in a modern game that thrives on its multiplayer. Where the issue comes in, somewhat predictably, is the elephant in the room: mobile. A couple of months ago, Konami somewhat bizarrely launched the new football game online test with little fanfare and much confusion. Plenty of people, myself included, were quick to defend the seemingly lacklustre graphics and gameplay, with this representing more of a true beta. However, the fear among the community now is that the gameplay and presentation is exactly what we're going to get when the game launches soon. It's not unfounded either, with the reveal trailer not exactly blowing anyone away graphically. Remember that messy image from the Unreal announcement? I mean, compare this to this. I know the in-game faces are often of a lower quality than the replay ones, but if you're showing off your latest game, it needs to be in the best possible light, especially after touting a 3-year dev cycle. And sadly, if this is running on a PS5 or a Series X, it doesn't look too great. I know the promise of Unreal is that you can have multiple versions of the same game running on different platforms, with higher end assets being used in systems that are capable of it and lower ones on mobile, etc. The problem here is that it doesn't look like this is what's happening. We've come a long way from relying on magazine screenshots to salivate over when it comes to new game graphics, but when the reveal looks this lacklustre, it doesn't really fill anyone with confidence. And this is where the controversial opinion subsides into something more typical. If you're going to take something as mechanically complex as a sports game, attempting to put it on mobile requires a mandate for people to play with the exact same control methods as the console bigger brothers, or a fundamental shift to appeasing the lowest common denominator. And it pains me to say it, but it looks like things are heading towards the latter with eFootball. There's simply no way to have an effective control scheme on a touchscreen without having the entire screen being taken up with virtual buttons, other possible inputs, or a ton of other general clutter. This isn't even going into the discussion that requires a mobile game to run on a huge catalogue of devices, ranging from the latest phones to one upwards of 7 or 8 years old, with an array of different screen sizes. This isn't to say it isn't workable, but I think the level of trust required that Konami will do the right thing simply isn't there right now. Graphics aren't the be-all and end-all of any game, but claiming photorealism in earlier interviews and then coming out with the bitterly disappointing reveal trailer proves my point. Of course, the rumours pointed to a second reveal happening on the 25th of August, which would focus more on the next-gen improvements, but surely logic would dictate that you needed to lead with your strongest footage. And let's talk about that second reveal for a moment. What was expected was a huge unveiling of next-gen footage and a lot more. What we actually got was fairly disappointing, and that's being kind. Whether it's promising different kicks to be released in patches, or a murky reveal which doesn't really explain where the footage is coming from, it didn't look great. Of course, there's talk of hands-on impressions coming soon, and we'll wait for those with bated breath, but until then we'll have to cross our fingers for something incredible. Sadly, I think eFootball's fate, at least in the short term, has been sealed. First impressions count for an awful lot these days, and even the rare exceptions take a while to right the ship. If we take perennial whipping boy No Man's Sky for example, it took the best part of 3 years for that redemption arc to be completed. If eFootball takes 3 years to regain the favour lost in this initial reaction, it could well prove disastrous for the franchise, particularly if FIFA follows suit next year as rumoured with its own suite of next-gen improvements. It could really spell trouble for the game we've all been stuck in a love-hate relationship with for so long. The last point with regard to the reveal comes with the general presentation. I've touched on it a few times now, but the announcement didn't really look next-gen. I know that phrase is a generic catch-all term, but it's an important one to so many fans. The first question that's always asked when it comes to a new generation of consoles, at least in my experience, is how are the graphics? And with this trailer, the honest answer is not that great. The animations look somewhat stilted, the pitch itself looked flat and not in a good way, and the faces look like they've been ripped straight from an earlier version of the last few titles, a far cry from what we saw last year. This, coupled with the loud and bold choices made for the periphery content like the menus and branding, has immediately soured a huge chunk of the fanbase on the game. It's understandable and it's incredibly disappointing. When you look at the strides being made by 2K and the NBA franchise in the graphics department, the disparity is simply staggering. I know that's something of an apples to oranges comparison, but I don't think it was unfair to expect a little bit more than what we got a few weeks ago. The last thing that I want to say is to the community. WEMB was a hub for the community for the longest time, but things inevitably turned toxic, and this led to the discussion to nix the forums a few years back. It was a heartbreaking decision to take, but it became impossible to moderate, and ultimately it was necessary. Sadly, this toxicity spills out onto social media and other platforms, and it's completely unwarranted. I've been invested in PES since Thierry Henry and Pierluigi Collina stared at me from my gaming shelf, so I understand the frustration, but at the same time, I would class Adam as a personal friend, and some of the stick he gets goes well beyond the level of acceptable. People seem to forget that the control of a franchise resides beyond the public faces. Particularly with Japanese publishers, the chances of it being down to those who are easily accessible on social media are slim to none. Ultimately then, where does this leave the football franchise that helped launch this channel and site? Well, right now we don't really know. This should be an exciting time. In theory, Konami are disrupting the sports game industry in a huge way, and that should be applauded. The issue comes with a muddled message around the mobile implementation, a lacklustre graphical showing, and a confusing lack of information around the traditional single-player modes. As a fan of a lower division football team, my motto has always been keep the faith, but with eFootball reigning supreme and Konami essentially taking the PES, this is getting a lot harder and harder to do. Thank you for watching. If you have enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe. Let us know your thoughts on the future of football games below down in the comments, and we'll see you soon. Alright, take care guys, bye bye.